The Institute of Internal Auditors presents All Things Internal Audit. In this episode, Eric Wilson talks with Dr. Kelly Richmond Pope about the psychology behind fraud, why ordinary people commit unethical acts, and how trust, pressure, and culture shape fraud risk. They discuss accidental versus intentional perpetrators, cognitive blind spots, whistleblowing challenges, and what auditors can do to better detect and prevent fraud.
So I figured we could just jump in. I'm always curious when I meet somebody like yourself who is a true expert in a particular area. What is it that got you into this field? What was the spark that drew you into it and kept you where you're at and took you to the level where you're at really with this expertise?
My spark was my students. Years ago, I had a student that did a paper on forensic accounting. And I read this paper and I was unfamiliar with the area at the time. This was a long time ago. And I realized that it was this field that was a combination of financial accounting, auditing, criminology, a little bit of tax, a little bit of sociology, some psychology, and a dash of nosiness if you're nosy. And so the field spoke to me just from a theoretical foundation. I just wanted to learn more. And at this time, this was the beginning of when American Greed started to come on TV. And so, any of our listeners here, I'm sure you have watched an American Greed episode here and there over the years. But what always sort of frustrated me at the beginning of American Greed when it first started was you never heard from the perpetrators. You always heard from people talking about them. And I always felt like there's another story there. Like, when someone tells something third hand or second hand, some of the details get lost and some of the explanations get skewed. So I always wanted to talk to the person that they actually committed the crime. And so I started going around the country and doing on camera interviews with white collar felons, whistleblowers, and victims of fraud. But specifically, we're talking about the whistleblowers or the perpetrators. And as I was doing the interviews, I realized how normal they were, how they were just involved in regular business decisions, regular business meetings, and someone said something that seemed a little questionable. And that happens to all of us. So I realized then that these stories are powerful and they are relatable and they should be shared. So that was the spark of the relatability and really trying to understand the humanity in these situations because we might not admit it. And Eric, you've had a long career too. You have said in a meeting once or twice where the things that people were talking about were like, "Eh, that might be a little, we might not want to do that." And it's not that it's illegal, but when you think about legality and ethicality, those are very different things. And so that was the spark of me just realizing that the situations that they're in are the high pressure situations many executives are in. And let's share these stories. And so let's start talking about it differently.
That background is great because as I got your book and I started looking through it, and one of the things that I really appreciated was you take this approach of, hey, let's just forget this idea of the stereotypical con artists that you see in the movies and everything else. These are your neighbors, your coworkers. It's you in the wrong situation or under the wrong circumstances. And so when you think about from a psychological perspective and with all the work that you've done, most of the time, I would say almost all the time, these are employees who didn't necessarily start out with the idea of, hey, I'm going to go in this company and I'm going to defraud them. I'm sure that does happen on occasion. But typically, it's a trustworthy employee who over time converts into committing fraud. What is the driver? What is the psychology behind making that transition? What have you seen as being what really causes that to happen for somebody?
I want to give the disclaimer. I am not a psychologist.
Absolutely.
I'm a CPA, I'm a CFE, I am not a psychologist. I'm just a nosy person, that likes to just dig and dig and dig and dig and dig and ask questions. I feel like I'm like the Oprah of fraud. Maybe that's a good name. But to go back to your question, when I think about the psychology, I want to talk about, did you ever see Breaking Bad
Mhm.
on AMC? Okay.
Absolutely.
And so remember the main character, the teacher, Mr. White?
Hmm.
If you think about his situation, he thought that he had a terminal illness. He thought that his family was going to be left in ruins when he passed away. And he was a chemistry teacher. And so he felt as though his back was against the wall. What can I do to earn money quickly and a lot of it? And so it was the pressure of just life, adulting, as we like to say, but just the pressure of feeling like I have a need and I have an immediate need. How can I fill it fast? And so I think that although we're talking about a show, I think that is representative of what happens in life as an adult, whether you have experienced job loss, whether you've experienced an unexpected pregnancy. We know that's a blessing, but unexpected pregnancy, unexpected illness, all of these pressures that happen, and you've got to figure out, how can I get money fast? And so I think it's the pressure of just and all of us face pressures, but many of us don't have a family member that we can borrow $40,000 from. Or, like you think about it, as you get older, the pressures get far more complex. And when you experience one, getting out of it takes layers. And so I think sometimes people they look around and they realize, how can I get fast cash? What do I have access to? What do I have control over? And oftentimes it's their companies, because you think about it, there are lots of companies that have poor internal controls, that might not be regulated well. And it's not that hard to do. And so it happens and you think you're gonna pay it back. So I think it's pressure.
Okay. And the other thing that was really interesting, one of the stories that you related in your book is there's also the other side of it where people who have everything in life and they don't have to worry anything. And there were as at least one example that I saw where the person did it just because he could. Because I think he had that social pressure of, I don't have struggles. I see everybody else doing it. So I'm going to go do this because really, I've never really had to worry about anything. So here's something that I can just do that, might be exciting, might be interesting. So it was just really fascinating to read, though, how everything frames down to there is some kind of pressure that forces people into these situations. And I appreciate you really clarifying that out for us.
I want to add, Eric, I think that what you just touched upon is something interesting too, because you talk about the person that really doesn't have to do it. And there's something to be said for that adrenaline rush of getting away with something. I mean, I went skydiving years ago. I don't know why I went skydiving. I mean, it's the most ridiculous, dangerous thing to do, to say, I'm going to jump out of a plane and hope that the parachute opens. But the feeling of once your feet hit the ground and you did it, you have the bragging rights that I went skydiving. I think there is a psychology there too that you're speaking of, and that's just the thrill of trying and pulling a fast one over someone's eyes, and that is fulfilling for some people too.
So you describe in your book and different talks that you've done and papers you've written that it's intentional, it's accidental, or it's righteous fraudsters. If you had to talk to a group of auditors to say, "Hey, here's going to be the one that is going to be the most challenging for you to identify," is there one within that group? Okay, and then if so, which one?
I think the accidental perpetrator is the one that could be any of us. Because when the way I talk about it, the intentional perpetrators are more like a con artist mentality. So a lot of us don't identify with that. We don't look at an organization, see what the weaknesses are, and then try to exploit it for personal gain. Most of us don't relate to that. But I think most of us can relate to the situation of my supervisor, my controller, my CEO, my CFO asking me to do something. And I don't push back. I don't ask any questions. I want to be a part of the team. I want to get a good rating. So I just do it. I might not feel that great about it, but I just do it. That is the profile, I think, of the high performing or even mid performing employee. And so that person is amongst all of our teams. And so how to help support that person, I think, is challenging, because they want to do good, but they want to do good. They want to be pleasing. So those people that have the pleasing personalities, which most of us do, we're trusting, we're pleasing. So I think the accidental perpetrator is the one that is the most identifiable and the most likely to happen and you don't realize it's happening to you. Righteous perpetrators are a little bit more senior in an organization, and so sometimes they feel like the rules don't necessarily apply to them. I would say that they are the next category. Accidental would be first, righteous perpetrators would be second, and then intentional perpetrators would be third in terms of its frequency amongst the team.
Obviously, we all have cognitive biases and blind spots with what we do on a day-to-day basis. The longer you're in an organization, the more comfortable you get to be around people, and certain things just become normal, even though maybe they're not normal to other people. So you've, I'm sure, gone into organizations and looked from the outside, and I've had this experience too, where I'll go in and I'll talk to a group of auditors, and I'll say, "How do we miss this?" But I'm coming in from the outside, so it's easy for me to see it, but somebody who's in an organization might not see something as apparently. So when you think about cognitive biases and blind spots, what's the most common cause of auditors overlooking fraud risk, even when the warning signs are there?
Trust. One simple word, trust. I mean, and you think about it, trust is a very powerful thing because what trust allows us to do is sort of let somebody else do an aspect of the job that we're supposed to do. So when you think about the role of an auditor or an internal auditor, it's a tough job to go in and pass judgment or opine on things, especially at the internal audit role, because the people and the processes that you are offering an opinion about are overseen by people you know. So you're within this organization, but yet you have to have this independent and unbiased opinion of what you're seeing. And that's really, really hard. So if anybody walks in and can take some of that burden away from you because you trust them, that is a very powerful emotion. And I think that the idea of trust is what allows us to miss things. We think that trust is sometimes being insensitive or inappropriate behavior. For example, if I asked you, Eric, how much do you make a year? And you said, I'm just going to use a number, $10,000. And I said, well, show me an invoice. I'm just asking you for verification, but to some people that might be offensive. But yet I'm just asking for verification. And so trust is this really interesting dynamic because if you don't show it, you're so concerned about how the other party might react to you, but it's the introduction of it that allows you to have all these blind spots and not pay attention to the things that are right in front of your face. When I directed and produced All the Queen's Horses, which is my documentary about the largest municipal fraud in U.S. history, the perpetrator in my documentary was a woman by the name of Rita Crunwell. Well, Rita Crunwell embezzled over $53.7 million over 20 years. Now, Dixon is this super small town, probably about 16,000 people, annual budget between $6 and $8 million. If your city comptroller owns 400 horses, that might start making you wonder, how? Like, where are you getting this money from? How? If your city comptroller takes almost 4 months out off a year, she's not in the office, you might wonder, well, how is she living if she's taken all this time off? Like, where is the money coming from? But your trust in her is what allowed so many people to just not pay attention to all the red flags and blind spots that are right in front of them. So I think trust is the power word of the day.
There's a really another interesting component that I want to run by you, and this is actually an excerpt from your book. I hope you don't mind me reading it. Related to this exact situation, you started this part with saying, "I'm pretty sure Rita Crumwell hates me. I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect it's true. I understand it. I, a mere accounting professor, exposed her crimes to an international audience. I've made a career out of her. If I were her, I'd hate me too." That's a powerful thing to say. And when you think about internal auditors who sit within an organization, and I got to sit next to this person for the next 20 years, maybe, I don't necessarily want them hating me. And what if I'm going down this road and it turns out to be wrong, but now I've burned bridges and everything else? So that's another, I think, powerful component of you have to find that balance of, yes, this person might hate me, but also I have to figure out what they're doing and do it in a way that is most appropriate for the organization.
I think what we underestimate is the tough role of an internal auditor. It is a hard job to be inside of an organization and to offer an independent view of that organization and have to offer opinions, suggestions, improvements on people that you work alongside of. That's not easy. And I don't think we talk about it enough as to how challenging and important the role is, but it's hard. It's very hard. I'm sure in your career, you've had to offer an opinion, an unpopular opinion of maybe a peer or someone that you might not want to offer opinion about, but you had to because that's your role. And it puts you in a very, very uncomfortable situation. But I think the more that people understand the role and the importance of the internal audit function, the more respect they can have for it and understand it is just the job. It's almost like a police officer. Like, a police officer, when you need them, you want them there. Like you want them to do their job. You want them to protect and serve. You want them there. It's sort of the same thing with an internal auditors. I think we just have to elevate and respect the role so that everybody understands that this person is here to make our entire organization safe.
Absolutely. And I think too with auditors, we have to accept the fact that there's no shame in saying, hey, this is getting to a point, or this is a situation where maybe we need to bring in a third party to help us out who's unbiased to all this, because that does happen. And sometimes, as you start digging into things, some of these things get pretty complex and pretty deep. And you start getting a lot of pressure within the organization, and bringing in that third party can really help with that. If you think about different environments that you've seen, is there any particular major clues to you that when you start to look at an organization, just indicate that potentially the culture is shifting towards one that may be one where fraud can occur, or one that you just go in and say, "Oh, there's definitely something here." I haven't even really started looking yet, but I would suspect that there's probably something going on.
I think organizations that have no formal fraud training, fraud ethics training, and engaging and impactful training, not just did you sign the code of conduct, not just did you watch the online video, but someone that can come in, create that safe space, and really force you to be self reflective. And sometimes doing that is using scenario based, high pressure, immersive cases so that people can do that more because we don't have enough practice on making judgment calls. And so that's to me why just signing a code of conduct or just reading a code isn't helpful because you haven't given a person the opportunity to think through a situation. And you really do need to do that. I think an organization that is void of training, void of that ethics and fraud training, and probably quarterly, not just annually, would be a first sign. So, yeah, that's what I would say is one of the first, I wouldn't say a red flag, but a flag, something you want to pay attention to.
An indicator that maybe there's something broader happening. Um, One of the things that I've noticed in my career is that fraudsters are typically people who are likable. They're highly competent. They can use charm as a tool. You even talked about in your book. One example was a fellow professor at DePaul who, and I appreciate you saying this. You said, "This person was my friend, and I would still consider him to be a friend and somebody who I like." But he did this thing that I couldn't believe he did, and part of that is because of you knew him, you knew his family, you knew everything else. So, in terms of using that, how can auditors remain objective without becoming overly skeptical of everybody and everything that's going on within an organization?
That's a tough one, and this might not sound like a very, popular, suggestion, but I think auditors, to the best of their abilities, they really need to manage the kinds of relationships they have within an organization, because you don't want to get too close to the people that you ultimately have to review. If you can maintain, "This is work, this is not my personal life is out here, these are my friends," because I, at some point, might need to evaluate negatively someone here. Probably creating those barriers is the easier way to go.
I think that's really helpful, and it's a tough thing to do because on one hand, you have to build relationships as an auditor because you don't want people to run when they see you. But on the other hand, you have to keep in mind the fact that, to your point, that someday you may be having to make some judgment calls on a particular individual or department that are really not going to be comfortable. So
You can be strategic about how you manage those relationships. I mean, I think going out to lunch and talking you very high level about details is fine. But, there are a lot deeper relationships that can often form in organizations where employees are traveling together, you're going to their birthday parties. I mean, you end up, and so to me, if you are in the internal audit function role or external auditors are a little bit different, but internal audit function role, it's very hard to maintain those kinds of relationships internally and do your job objectively. So I think you really have to manage how you create friendships, how you create those work relationships, especially for people that you have to at some point observe within your own organization.
Auditors, we're doing interviews all the time. We're doing walkthroughs for SOX. We're doing day to day interactions with different departments, different individuals. What red flags should we be looking out for?
This is gonna be contextual to the situation, but I think that when people can't answer basic questions that you know they should know the answer to, that should be a red flag. I mean, I'm going off of past experiences I've had with interviews that I've done with people that have been in these situations, people that have, pulled a fraud in a situation, and it's like the person that's asking the questions sometimes is dancing around the question, and so they don't wanna attack it, head on, and they need to. So I think though the inability to answer basic questions, the inability to produce reports, that should be readily available, the inability to have audited financial statements when you know they should be audited if given the size of the organization. So there are things that are they're not hidden. It's just we feel uncomfortable addressing them because most of us don't like confrontation. We don't feel like I'm going to go in and just keep asking this person this question over and over and over and over again. We don't want to be that person, so we don't do it. So I think it's just those basic obvious things that we don't that basic answer cannot be produced.
So one of the most obvious ones that I've seen in my career is what I call, and I've seen it a couple times, the narcissist snap. I'm sure that is not an official thing. Again, same thing. I'm not a psychologist, but it's somebody who will sit there and talk victim and down and sad and distraught and why everything can't happen the way it's supposed to until you push them to a point, and then all of a sudden they snap and they become a bulldog and they're like going for the throat. That's a pretty obvious one. But the other thing that I've noticed too, and you may have seen this, is somebody will mess up and just have a little misstep on an answer, but rather than correcting, which normal people would do if they weren't worried about it, they try to keep stacking more information on that little misstep. And you just sit there and you're like, whoa, if you had just fixed this 10 steps ago in your answer, we wouldn't be doing this. But now I'm seriously sitting here going, why are we having to do this song and dance? And I think what you're trying to get to is it's really a gut feeling. A lot of times you're just going to build to where you're going, this doesn't make sense. What this person just saying just doesn't make sense to me. And you just keep digging and digging and digging. So appreciate that.
I'm gonna say something that might not be popular on our conversation today, but you use the word narcissist, and I'll tell you this, and this is just sort of Kelly's own personal belief is most successful people that are in corporate America, and this is from mid-level on up, have some level of narcissism in order to function.
Yep. That's fair.
Now there can be varying degrees of it, but most of us have some level of narcissism for us to be able to function and be competitive on a team or like we have to be. So,
Absolutely.
I don't know that it is the negative word that it has come to be because I think we all have traits of narcissism and because it's the only way we can really function.
No, I agree. I think, and just like a lot of things, too much of a good thing can become really bad, and you start to see that. At least in my experience, when you do fraud investigations, there are the people who have narcissism to the extreme, and then it really starts to come out when you pressure them, and it gets pretty interesting. So, so you've worked a lot with whistleblowers. That is, it's easy for everybody from the outside when something goes bad to go, why didn't everybody just come up and say something about this? Like, of course, if I was in that situation, I would go say something. But in reality, it's really easy to say that, and it's a lot harder to actually do it. So, you having worked with whistleblowers and studied them, what are some of the psychological barriers that keep employees from speaking up, and how can we as auditors help people get past that?
Being a whistleblower is tough. I mean, you are taking the weight of the world on your shoulders, and it is despite what you might be saying could be true, the truth is often distracted by so many other factors. And I think it's hard being a whistleblower. And I think we have to be very honest and upfront with that, because it's probably easier to stay silent and go find another job than it is to fight. And again, going back to what we talked about earlier, we're not natural confrontational people. Like, so calling something out that everybody else thinks one thing and you think another, that's a hard thing to do. And so I think the reason why people stay silent is because of isolation, reputational damage. It's hard. There are very few whistleblowers that I've ever seen that have had a positive road. And so in my documentary, Kathy Swanson was the whistleblower who exposed Rita Crunwell's fraud. And perhaps she's might want maybe a sample of one, because maybe because it was a governmental entity, she was saving people taxpayer dollars. Nobody really lost their jobs. But when you think about her situation, had it been a publicly traded company and there was a reputational damage that the company experienced, maybe there were layoffs as a result of it. Like, you coming forward has such a domino effect that people can easily talk themselves out of it.
If every auditor out there adopted one mindset shift about human behavior, what shift do you think would be most important in their ability to detect and prevent fraud?
Trust no one.
Fair enough.
Trust no one.
That's fair.
Trust no one, and also be self-reflective of your own self. Like, think about, if you've never been tested, you also may not know how you would respond. But just having this mindset that you can trust nothing will probably be serve you well if you're an auditor.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I think, one thing that I've seen in my career is that auditors are not always the best at introspection. And so, to your point, trust no one, including yourself. Make sure you're checking yourself. And for, the audit teams out there getting the quality assurance reviews and everything else, I will point out that the IIA has a fraud framework that they put out last year that you can find on the website. That's spectacular. And the nice thing about it is that it's a guidance document that any audit department can use. And it takes out that bias of, what do I want to do in my department? Because the IIA is just saying, here's what you should be doing and here's how it should be structured. So if you're an audit department out there that's trying to figure out how to do this, go check there first and then work backwards from there. But I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for having me, Eric. It was wonderful chatting with you.
Same here.
Fraud is getting trickier, but you can stay ahead. Join us online for the 2026 Fraud Unmasked virtual conference on February 17th. It's one packed day of practical tips, expert insights, and 13 plus CPEs. So save your spot today and register at theiaa.org. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and rate us. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also catch other episodes on YouTube or at theiaa.org. That's THEIIA.org.